This lecture is about the evolution of animals. A first and important question is, what is an animal? Well, if you recall back to earlier lectures, we talked about three domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Eukarya is the group of organisms that are eukaryotic. They have membrane-bound organelles. Within that domain, there are three kingdoms of organisms that are multicellular: Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Plantae, and Kingdom Fungi. There's also a variety of other different lineages that are single-celled, and we call those protists. So an animal is a multicellular eukaryotic organism. Well, how's it different from a plant or a fungus? Well, animals are heterotrophic, so that means that they eat other things, but the difference between an animal and a fungus is that they obtain their nutrients by ingestion, so they actually pull the other organism into their own bodies and then digest it. Whereas fungus will actually excrete digestive enzymes, digest their food externally, and then absorb the digested products. Most animals reproduce sexually and then proceed through a series of developmental stages. So the egg and the sperm, which are both haploid, meet and fertilize, creating a zygote, which is diploid. Those diploid cells then will undergo many series of mitosis events where they are duplicating themselves. After duplication, you have cellular differentiation, where cells will become different parts of the body of the new organism. The organism will grow and develop into an adult, and specialized organs within the adult will undergo meiosis to create haploid eggs, and the sequence continues. Early animals evolved during the Cambrian, and it is thought that the very earliest animal-like organisms evolved from colonies of protists, or single-celled organisms that had some advantage in living together. Reproductive cells look very, very similar. When they're first forming, you have the process of a gastrula, which looks very similar to some of these early protists. Now, animals are probably the most diverse group. There are over 30 different phyla. However, we will not have time to cover all of the diversity of animals within this course. So we're going to focus on some major evolutionary advances in several groups so that you have an overview of the diversity. So we reconstruct evolutionary history based on clues from comparative anatomy, embryology, molecular data such as DNA and protein sequences, and this helps us to reconstruct the relationship between the different organisms. So in front of you we have the phylogeny of the animals. On your left-hand side we have the sponges. These we would call the most basal group because they are probably one of the first branches that evolved. And then to your right-hand side you have your most derived group or most complex group, and those are the chordates. Now, what do you need to focus on in this sort of lecture? I want you to focus on novelty, evolutionary novelty. What does this new group have that hasn't been had before in the animal kingdom? So first of all, I want to point out that the majority of animals have no backbone. In fact, 87% of described animals are within a single phylum Arthropoda, the arthropods. So this is an extraordinarily biologically diverse group. So the major invertebrate, or without a backbone, phyla that you should learn are the sponges, which we call porifera, jellyfish, which are called Cnidaria, flatworms or platyhelminths, roundworms or nematodes, the clams and their kin, the mollusks, segmented worms, annelids, and the insects and their kin, which are the arthropods, and the starfish and sea urchins, Echinodermata. They have no backbones and represent 95% of the species in the animal kingdom. So we'll start with sponges. These are the simplest, phylum Porifera. Their bodies are very simple. They have no differentiated tissues, but they do have specialized cells that perform specific functions. For example, they have a cell called a choanocyte, which has a flagellum, and that flagellum is waved in the central cavity of the sponge, creating a flow of water through pores and out of the main hole. Sponges are asymmetrical, so they have no symmetry to them. They are sessile, that means they don't move. Phylum Cnidaria is a group that includes jellyfish, coral, and sea anemones. There are two basic body plans for the Cnidarian. Cnidaria have two body layers, an internal layer, which here is indicated in yellow, and an external layer in blue. They have a single mouth, which is also their anus. And they have tentacles, and on their tentacles they have special cells called cnidocytes, and these cells are stinging cells and are used to help catch their food. Cnidaria have radial symmetry. That's the symmetry of a pie or a circle. You can cut it through the center from any angle and get both sides being equivalent halves. The next group are the flatworms, or platyhelminthes. The flatworms, while fairly simple, have some major advantages over Cnidaria. The first is that they have a separate mouth and an anus. In addition, they have developed tissues that respond to light. We call those eye spots, and they respond to light by sending chemical signals down other cells, and those cells are called nervous tissue cells. So they have some simple nerve cords, and these eye spots, while they don't allow the animal to see an image, they can allow the animal to detect the presence or absence of light, and that helps to guide them to keep into dark places. So I want you to think about your own skin. Your skin, even if you were totally blind, you would still be able to tell whether or not it was daylight or nighttime, because your skin has got cells called melanocytes that respond to the presence of ultraviolet light during the day. And in a similar way, the flatworms have very simple cells in their eye spots that respond to light. Some flatworms are free living, like they live in streams under rocks, and others are parasitic, like tapeworms. Flatworms are the first group that we would describe as bilaterally symmetrical, so they can be divided in only one plane straight down the center of their bodies, and each half is equivalent. The next group are phylum Nematoda. These are the roundworms. These have a digestive tube with two openings. They have a mouth and an anus, and some of them are parasitic. So at the bottom picture here you can see Trichinella. This is a juvenile Trichinella roundworm in the muscle tissue, probably of a pig. This is one of the reasons why it's very important to cook meat. And nematoda are very diverse and widespread. You find them everywhere and in everything. Phylum Mollusca includes several different groups that look like they're not related. However, they are. Mollusk means soft-bodied. So Mollusca has got three major classes. They've got the gastropods, which are what you would recognize as a snail, and those are protected by a single shell. Some gastropods have lost their shell, such as slugs, and they're protected instead by a thick layer of mucus. We have bivalves, which are protected by shells that are divided in two, and then we have cephalopods. Now, within the mollusc group, we have the evolution of a complex brain, and we have the evolution of an eye that uses a lens. So this is the first instance of an eye that can actually focus an image on a retina and send that signal to a brain that then can process it. So cephalopod actually means brain on legs, and I think that's a great description for an octopus. The annelids are your classic worms, your oligocete worms or earthworms, the kind that you would find in your garden. These have got body segmentation. They have a mouth and an anus. They have a simple brain. They have a heart. And most oligocetes are actually hermaphroditic, and that means that they have both male and female gamete-producing organs within their body, and they can exchange roles with one another as to which one is going to be the male and which one's going to be the female. There are three main classes of annelids: the oligocetes or earthworms, polychaetes, which means many spines, and the hierodinea or the leeches. Now, leeches are often bemoaned for being disgusting because they suck blood, but they are extremely important in the medical industry. If you ever are unlucky enough to sever a digit or an ear or another part of your body, leeches are used to help keep blood flow through that part of the organ while your body's healing. The arthropods are the largest phylum. 85% or more of the diversity in the animal group comes from the arthropods. Now, there are actually four main groups of arthropods. You have the insects, which are terrestrial or land-living. You have the crustaceans, which are aquatic. You have the myriapods. Myria means many and pod means leg. So these are the centipedes and millipedes. And last but not least, you have the arachnids, which are the eight-legged arthropods, which are primarily terrestrial, and that includes spiders and scorpions. So Arthropoda is named Arthropoda because of their jointed appendages. Arthro from arthritis, swelling of your joint, and poda means leg. So arthropoda means jointed legs. They all have an exoskeleton, which is a little bit like a suit of armor. So when an arthropod wants to grow, it has to shed its hard exoskeleton and regrow a new soft one that's a little bit larger. The general characteristics of arthropods are that they have segments that each segment can be specialized and form a different function. So in this picture here, you've got a picture of a lobster. It has one segment that has legs evolved for defense. Those are the pinchers. It has legs that have evolved for walking. It has legs that have evolved for swimming. It has specialized sensory receptors in its antennae. So just to reiterate, the four main groups of arthropods: the arachnids are primarily terrestrial and have 8 legs. The crustaceans are primarily aquatic. You can find them in fresh water and in salt water, so lobsters, shrimps, and barnacles. The millipedes and centipedes are primarily terrestrial as well. They can have 1 or 2 legs per body segment. And then the insects, which have a 3-part body and have 6 legs. And most insects also have wings. And these include everything from ants to mosquitoes, bugs, ground beetles, grasshoppers, butterflies, etc. Now, many insects undergo what we would refer to as a metamorphosis in their development. That means that as they're going through their life cycle, they dramatically change and reform the structure of their body. And the classic example of metamorphosis is the larval butterfly, which we call a caterpillar, growing and developing into a pupa and then emerging as an adult butterfly. The last phylum of invertebrates are the phylum Echinodermata. That means spiny skin. Echino is for spiny and dermata is for skin. And many of these have spiny surfaces. They include sea stars, sand dollars, sea cucumbers, and they're all marine. They don't have body segments. They have an endoskeleton, and they've got a water vascular system to exchange gas. Most of them we would describe as having a pentaradial symmetry, which is a variation of radial symmetry that is a plane of only 5 different points of division. When echinoderms are larvae, they are actually bilateral, but when they develop into adults, they become radial. So let's talk about vertebrates and chordates. These are the small group of animals that have got backbones. Phylum Chordata has got 4 hallmarks or novelties. It has a dorsal hollow nerve cord. Dorsal means on your back. A lobster's nerve cord runs along the base of its belly, whereas your nerve cord runs along your back. A notochord. This is a stiffened rod that runs from the head all the way down to the tail region. Pharyngeal slits. These are gill slits that are used for gas exchange and capturing food. And a post-anal tail. So if I told you that you were a chordate, you might not believe me because you might ask where your tail is, where your pharyngeal gill slits are, and where your notochord is. Well, your notochord resides in the discs between your vertebrae. Your pharyngeal gill slits evolved into your jaws and ears, and during your embryological development, you lost your post-anal tail. So some of the simplest chordates include lancelets and tunicates, and the more complex ones include the vertebrates, which have got a backbone, like snakes. So this diagram here shows you a simplified version of a chordate with the hollow nerve cord, a notochord, muscle segments, a post-anal tail, pharyngeal gill slits, a mouth, and a simplified brain. So within the chordates, we have a large number of groups. Once again, this is more than we could possibly cover in this course, but I want you to think about the highlights of evolution through this group. So we're going to be looking at the evolution of vertebrae, jaws, lungs, legs, the amniotic egg, hair, and feathers. The early vertebrates evolved about 540 million years ago. Class Agnatha, the agnathans, are very similar to these early vertebrates, and you can still find them. We call these lampreys. They have no jaws, they have big suckers on their mouths, and they basically predate on dead or dying fish or other marine organisms. So from having no jaws, we evolved jaws. This sort of iconic jawed fish is the shark. Those are the cartilaginous fishes. Those came first. They have a flexible skeleton that was made of cartilage. And only later did we evolve a skeleton that has the deposition of calcium carbonate or bone. So chondroichthyes means cartilaginous ichthyes or cartilaginous fishes. And those are your sharks and rays. Osteoichthyes means bony fish, and that includes trout, koi, salmon, and tuna. In the fossil record, we have a separate evolutionary branch of bony fishes or osteichthyes, that includes two groups, the lungfishes and the lobe-finned fishes. These are actually the closest relatives to terrestrial vertebrates, and they're in the fossil record are examples of transitionary fossils. African lungfish have got lungs when they're adults, so they can live without water in dried mud. And coelacanths have got the very beginnings of bones that one might consider to be limbs that the tetrapods, the next group of vertebrates, evolved. So we have amphibians. These are your first group of tetrapods. So tetra means four, pod means legs. So these have got a vertebral column, they've got four legs. They're still tied to the water. Amphibious means having a dual life. They lay their eggs in water. Their young have got gills and tails, and as they grow and develop, some of them lose their tails like frogs, and others keep their tails like salamanders. Some lose their legs completely like caecilians. So they exhibit a mixture of aquatic and terrestrial adaptations. Frogs have got lungs, however they do a lot of gas exchange through their skin. And they all need water to reproduce because their eggs do not contain an amnion. Their eggs need to be in water to keep hydrated. So the amphibians really represent the first vertebrates to colonize land. And they descended from fishes that had lungs and fins with muscles. The reptiles are the first group to really adapt to being terrestrial and separating themselves from the water, because the reptiles were able to encase their eggs with a leathery shell, and that helps them to be able to lay their eggs outside of water, but the eggs don't dry out. So it turns out that birds actually evolved from within the reptile group, so we'll have to talk about them slightly differently. But reptiles, broadly speaking, are the turtles, crocodiles, tuataras, lizards, and snakes. So they have adaptations for living on land, including laying eggs. They're ectotherms, so they obtain their body heat from the environment. They have lungs for breathing, and they have scales that prevent them from dehydrating. During the Mesozoic, reptiles diversified extensively and resulted in groups such as the dinosaurs, which were the largest land animals. So from within the reptiles, we have the evolution of the birds. Now, birds have specialized bones that are honeycombed and hollow that makes them lighter. They are warm and they regulate their body temperature through endothermy. Class Mammalia has two primary features that are mammalian hallmarks. The first is the presence of hair, and the second is the presence of mammary glands to produce milk to nourish the young. Class Mammalia evolved from reptiles about 225 million years ago. So there are three main groups of mammals. The first are called monotremes. These are the egg layers. They have the ancestral behavior of laying an egg. Spiny anteaters, called echidnas, and duck-billed platypus. Both of these are small organisms that live in Australia and lay eggs. When the young are born, they're called puggles, and the young will drink milk that is excreted in a small patch of skin on the surface of the mother's belly. The mother doesn't have nipples. She basically sweats out the milk just in a confined patch. The next group are the marsupials. These are the pouched mammals. They have the highest biological diversity in Australia because Australia broke off from South America and Africa right around the time that the marsupials had evolved, and mammals only very recently have been introduced to Australia. So the marsupials evolved sort of in splendid isolation and include everything from kangaroos and koalas to Tasmanian devils and the extinct Tasmanian wolf. There's one species of marsupial in North America, and that's the opossum. It made its way north from South America when about 5 million years ago, South America and North America were linked back together again in Central America. So with marsupials, they do not have a placenta. The embryo starts to develop in the uterus, but it has to exit the uterus before it gets too large, because there are some, I jokingly call them errors in anatomy, in that the urinary system and the reproductive system are intertwined in such a way that kangaroos have bifurcated uteri, and so the baby has to be small enough to be able to make it out there. So these tiny little embryonic babies, you can see a picture of it in the bottom corner here, are born and crawl up into a pouch in the mother's belly, and the mother now has teats. So these are specific locations that the baby can attach to, and the mother will produce milk. And the babies will then basically grow externally. The last group of mammals are called placental mammals or eutherians. These are mammals like yourself that has a placenta that develops between the mother and the offspring in the womb. The placenta helps to exchange nutrients and gases and nourish the embryo much longer within the mother. Once the baby's born, mothers produce milk and are able to give their young a much larger head start. Now, because of having a placenta and having milk, there is much more of a social bond between the mother and her offspring, and this also predisposes the mammals to having social interactions between mothers for cooperative care of young. Within the mammal group, we have the evolution of primates. Primates evolved from insect-eating mammals about 40 million years ago. And the early primates were all very small, arboreal or tree-living. So a primate has nails instead of claws. It has wide sensory pads on its fingertips. Its hands and feet are flexible and can grasp. The eyes are forward-facing and close together. And there's an enhanced visual sense and reduction of nasal anatomy, so a focus on visual. The middle ear bones are completely enclosed, and there is increased complexity of the brain. So there's quite a few features that will unite all primates. They can include having limber shoulder joints, the eyes in front of the face, good hand-eye coordination, extensive parental care. And these characteristics really were shaped by natural selection for living in trees. Now there's a variety of different groups. We've got the Platyrrhini. These are monkeys that live in the New World, so Costa Rica, Central and South America. We've got the Strepsirrhini, so these are the lemurs and lorises that live in Madagascar. We've got the Tarsii, so those are the tarsiers. And we've got the Catarrhini, and the Catarrhini are the flat-faced monkeys and old world monkeys. It also includes the great apes. Within the great apes we have, so all the great apes do not have tails. We've got gorillas, we have got orangutans, we have chimpanzees and bonobos, and we have the genus Homo, which includes humans. Changes in the late Eocene in the environment led to fewer rainforests and more dry savanna regions, and approximately 20% of all living species of animals became extinct. And there was a very, very strong directional selection for primates to be able to cope with open savannas. And one way of coping with that would be to be able to stand up on your hind legs to look through the grasslands for predators. So hominoids, oid means looks like, homin is for human, so hominoids that look like human. This group is characterized by having a broad nose and palate, simple molars, a large brain, a broad trunk, reduced lumbar vertebrae, no tail, and an enlarged grasping great toe. And this is true for orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, humans, and gorillas. So the next question is, if we're hominoids, if we fall into the hominoid group of primates, what really makes a human and not a chimpanzee? Well, a really important trait is bipedalism, walking on two legs. And bipedalism can be detected in fossils by things like position of the foramen magnum. Foramen magnum is the hole at the base of your skull that your vertebral column rests on. If you, like a dog, are walking on all fours, your foramen magnum will be further up on the back of your head because your face will be pointing a different direction than if you're standing upright. Your vertebral column will have a different curve to it. Think about your back and how it has a curve at the base versus a dog's back, which is straight. Your rib cage will be structured differently. Your pelvis will be structured differently. It'll be narrower and more oriented to helping you walk upright. Your knee, the structure of your foot, the arch, your big toe, your toe curvature, all of these features together can help us determine whether or not an organism is bipedal or not. So you can go into the fossil record and you can look at a fossil and establish with some degree of certainty whether or not that organism walked on all fours or walked on two legs. So humans and apes had a common shared ancestry up until about 5 or 7 million years ago. And about 5 to 7 million years ago, humans diverged dramatically from the other groups. Now, one common misconception that people have is that they'll say, I didn't evolve from a chimpanzee. Well, you can't evolve from a chimpanzee just like you can't evolve from your cousin. You and your cousin share a grandparent a long time ago. So chimpanzees and humans had an ancestor in common, but chimps did not evolve into humans.